I made a very conscious decision, like after those first two ceremonies, I'd like shifted so much and I'd just dropped and let go of so much that I was never going back. And the honest truth of it was that I wasn't able to go back. Very quickly, it got into the thing of, well, who am I now?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Trip Sitting Podcast, where we explore what it means to be human. I am your host, Cam Leeds. This week's incredible human that we have joining us is DJ Paul Nolan, who has been an electronic music DJ for over 2 decades at this point, and he is also the co-founder of Microdose Music, which is the record label from Microdose, which put on Wonderland Conference a couple of weeks ago, which is how I actually met Paul, and now here we are coming full circle. This week, we get fucking deep on this episode. Paul was absolutely incredible. We dive into just so many really, really awesome topics. Talk about psychedelics and healing and his personal journey with that. We dive into the ego. We dive into music. We just get really, really deep, and I'm very blessed to have this conversation and to be able to bring it to everybody. So if you guys have not subscribed to the Trip Sitting Podcast, make sure that you are doing that. Make sure that you are following at tripsitting.blog on Instagram and TikTok. And then also, if you wouldn't mind, maybe giving this podcast a rating after you listen. If you liked it, or if you didn't like it, just come to me personally and I will take care of that with you. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Paul Nolan, DJ extraordinaire. So we met at Wonderland, and that was that the second year? Or was that the third? Have you been doing Wonderland all 3 years now?
No, this is my second year, so I missed the first year, and then last year and this year. Yeah.
Okay. How did you get connected with those guys and into this psychedelic community? Because I would argue that the club scene is also a psychedelic community in and of itself.
Oh yeah, I would argue it's the most psychedelic community.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've been involved in that community for over 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And a mutual friend of mine and one of the Microdose team, a guy called Tristan Hunt, he comes up to me one day at a electronic music industry conference in Ibiza that I go to every year called the International Music Summit. And a lot of people are now sort of more aware, because I've been progressively more and more open about my psychedelic experiences and how they've really helped me over the last 7 years that I've been interacting with them, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And he says to me, I've got a guy that you should really speak to. And he introduces me to a guy called Richard Scaife, who is the chairman of the board of Microdose, who run the Wonderland Conference. And me and Richard get on a call, hit it off instantly, really click, get on like a house on fire. Turns out we have a lot of mutual friends because he used to work in the electronic music industry as well.
Yeah.
And from there, that relationship just progressed. So it progressed from being asked to come and DJ at Wonderland last year to doing a live performance at the show last year to fill in for another big artist who couldn't make it due to a scheduling conflict. And then from there, that quickly evolved into going into business together in the Microdose Music record label, which launched this summer.
Oh, awesome. I didn't even know about that. So what is your guys' goal with that?
Yeah. So Microdose Music is a label entirely devoted to the curation of the creation of music for psychedelic therapy. So one of the big things that I took away from my first year at Wonderland last year was that I got to speak to a lot of frontline therapists who were working with MDMA, working with psilocybin, ketamine, you name it. They all said the same thing when they heard that I was a DJ. they said, "Oh my God, like Paul, we need help with the music because we're not DJs, we're therapists and
Mm-hmm.
scientists and everything else other than artists and musicians." And because I've got a very interesting background in that I'm a fully trained audio engineer, but then I'm also a qualified sound therapist. And I've got this background of my own psychedelic experiences, my own quote unquote healing journey through
Mm-hmm.
psychedelics. It puts me in a very interesting and very specific position to be able to help people en masse with the creation and the curation of this music so we can provide optimum experiences for people that allow them to get the most out of these very potent, very important experiences that they submit themselves to.
Mm-hmm.
And having listened to a lot of people's direct testimony, as in people having the actual sessions themselves and being participants and sometimes having great experiences, but then in other situations, the music wasn't on point. So therefore they couldn't quite access parts of themselves that they needed to. And in
Yeah.
some cases, the music resulted in them having a quote unquote bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of doubled down on my determination to, really help in that regard, because my experiences in the ayahuasca ceremonies or in the other modalities that I've worked with, I've had the benefit of the music being absolutely sensationally good.
Yeah.
Which is quite a bold statement for a DJ of 25 years to make, because my
Mm-hmm.
taste is quite specific, shall we say. and it takes a lot to make me sit up and go, shit, that sounds really fucking good.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the main ethos of the label, really, is to find artists in this space. I'm currently sat here really, really kind of not regretting, but like, shit, I wish I got to know Andre 3000 so I could have put that flute album out on Microdose.
Yeah.
Because like that's just been such a
That was an awesome album.
validation.
I gotta say,
Yeah.
I listened to that. I was like, that's so fucking cool that he did
Yeah.
that. And also
Yeah.
too, if like the reasons behind why he put that album out is like, I don't, I don't have the necessarily, like the same things to say that I was saying
Yeah.
back then. Like it's not going to be authentic if I'm trying
Yeah.
to do the same thing. So
I love
I
that
need to
thing he
change.
said. Yeah, I love that thing he said on that GQ cover video thing
Mm-hmm.
where he said, "What am I going to rap about now? Getting a colonoscopy."
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 49 years of age. Like, shit's not that interesting anymore, And he's right. He's totally right in that you have to follow your inclination. Right? It's what Joseph Campbell says. You've got to follow your bliss at the end of the day. And it's really interesting because I was speaking to somebody else who was on my panel at Wonderland, and we were talking about this. And he was saying like, oh yeah, the labels kind of like shitting themselves about it, but they're letting him do it because he's Andre and stuff like that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, but look how successful the album's been. Like it's really like made people think very, very differently. And it reminds me of a time when David Bowie, and Bowie's someone I admire. I don't love Bowie. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, Bowie
Mm-hmm.
never really spoke to me. Like, he did in parts, but it didn't really speak to me the way, say, someone like Prince spoke to me. However, a lot of inspiration regarding his creative process, right? And he once took, I think it was 12 years between albums. Very similar gap, actually, to what Andre's done with Outkast and his solo album. And he was asked in an interview, like, what took you so long? I mean, it's a shit question to begin with, right?
Yeah.
If you know anything about art. And why does it take you 12 years to make a new album? And Bowie was like, I had nothing to say. And it's like, it's so simple, that whole aspect of like, especially now with like streaming technology and Spotify
Mm-hmm.
and whatever, we're all told to, jump on this hamster wheel of like,
Mm-hmm.
Endless pumping out of content.
Yeah.
And what
It's
Andre's just
the idea of content creation versus creating art.
exactly.
I think those are two different things.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it as a way of creating content, I think you're just putting shit out there for the sake of putting shit out there. But when you're actually creating art and creating music, like that, there's no timetable on that. It's going to happen when it happens.
No, 100%. And I come from a genre in electronic music that, is guilty, the most guilty of just pumping stuff out just to keep your name on the top of the Spotify playlists and on the top of, sites like Beatport, for example, and it really doesn't lead to timeless art. And yet everyone stood there going, why aren't we writing classics like we were 25, 30 years ago? And it's like, well, because we're forced to put stuff out every 2 weeks to help people remember that we're even alive.
Yeah. Well, like the thing is too, like, I think, even growing up, I remember before an album or before a single would officially come out, I remember seeing marketing for this album is about to come out or this single is about to come out, because you'd have to then prepare yourselves to go either on, iTunes, I guess was really, really early back then, but go to the store and buy a physical CD. And that was how you were going to access that. Whereas now people do their marketing by putting out the thing already, and then essentially retroactively doing it, being like, look at this is already out, go stream it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. And I miss those days, and I try and actively like recreate them as much as I possibly can. So I come from a culture where, you go record shopping. So I owned a record store for a couple of years when I was very young, probably a little bit too young to own a record store, actually, 23 to the ages of 25.
Damn.
And what I remember from that time and my time in record shops in general is that you would go to the club, you would hear this DJ play something, it would absolutely blow your brains out. And you would walk into the record shop the next week saying, my God, like, Sasha or John Digweed or, any of these other like major legendary DJs like Carl Cox, like he played this thing and it, and you're kind of singing it over the counter to this bemused person who's like trying to figure out what the record was. But then like it came in like a few weeks later and there was like 5 test pressings or 5 white labels. And it turned into the fucking Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Like in the record store, because everybody wanted the shit, because it was like, that was your like advantage over everyone else.
Yeah, I'm going to play this and nobody else has this. Like not everybody had access to it because it was just on the records is where you got it.
Exactly. And then like people would go to extraordinary lengths to cover their own asses. Like, I know DJs that would put white stickers over everything they played. So if you peered over the DJ booth at the turntables, you couldn't see what it was.
Damn.
Or there was code words or things like that. It was like Jedi shit, basically.
Well, yeah, because I mean, back then you were actually having to take the physical records and put them onto the turntables.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually
like it wasn't just clicking a little button and scrolling and then just sliding to the side.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I love the modern conveniences because it allows me to do things that I couldn't do quite as easily. So one of the things that, not to get too much on a tangent here, but one of the things I love about the modern tech is that I can easily mix harmonically. So I can actually mix in key and the transitions are much smoother and I can manage the energy a lot better because all of that information is kind of like read into the, into the actual software on the deck. That being said, like I am still considering like moving back to vinyl at some stage, just because it's so much more of a live medium of play. I actually don't like using the word perform because, when something is performative, it kind of like insinuates that it's fake.
Yeah.
So I try not to use that word as much as possible. Like I'm basically playing in front of people,
Yeah.
That's the thing. But yeah, I definitely think there's a space for that. And I think ID culture is very much the modern equivalent of that, when people like ripping apart DJ sets online and, ID there, what's this ID? And like there's whole groups like dedicated to the identification of music on Facebook and stuff like that. But, sort of the point that I'm meandering around to here is when we launched the Microdose label in the summer and I put my album out as the first release on the label. And that was very much based on that live performance that I gave in Miami last year. So I basically wrote that album in 2 weeks because I was asked on 2 weeks' notice to fill that slot. And it was one of those situations where Richard phoned me, asked me to do it. I said yes, and then I put the phone down and went, shit. Like I've got to do this now. And I'm the biggest exponent of that. Like I love that whole thing of like if somebody asks you to do something and you're not sure whether it can be done, say yes and then figure out how to do it afterwards. I love We have a saying which is very sort of coarse back here in England, and I think it's a universal phrase now. But we call it shit or get off the pot.
Yep.
And I love being in that position where it's like deadlines, it's got to happen, or you're going over the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And it really did bring the best out in me. But when we did the release of that, we did a 2-week pre-release cycle, pre-sale on Bandcamp.
Okay.
And it was spectacularly successful. And
That's
I made
awesome.
more money in 2 weeks pre-sale on Bandcamp than I'd ever done previously selling any form of music via any form of medium. And it had that evocation of like the old school album launch where I could put extras into it. So I put a digital booklet in with like really beautiful artwork, and I got to write really thoughtful liner notes on like,
Yeah.
this is what the album's for, this is how you can use it, this is the intention placed behind it. And it was a beautiful process of putting it
Mm-hmm.
together and curating an item. I say this because I do a lot of artist coaching as well. I've got an amazing community of like super talented artists, and I always say your art is an artifact. And it was just an incredibly satisfying experience to create an artifact that
Mm-hmm.
hopefully people will go back to 5-10 years from now. And I think that's a decision as an artist that you can make. You can decide to dip your toe in that hamster wheel cycle that we were just talking about, or you can decide to take a step back and
Mm-hmm.
decide to make something timeless. And that's one
Yeah.
of the things that I'm motivated by, is whenever I put something out, I want people to still be playing it in 5 years
Mm-hmm.
from when it first came out.
Yeah. The thing about music too is, and like speaking of those artifacts, is it brings you back to that place in time, like exactly where you were in life. Like I can think back to some of the very first albums that I bought and was really, really into. And like it takes me back to like me being a kid in the second grade and like everything that was happening in my life around there. I can remember vividly the second that this one song comes on. And like it brings back all these insanely like nostalgic memories. And like music has a really, really rare ability to just literally time travel, like to the exact space and time that you were when you first connected with this music. And having those little artifacts, I think is really, really awesome. I think I've always connected to with music videos as well. Like I love being able to see the artist rendition of their music, how they want to then visually display that to people. I think it's one of the coolest things.
It really is. And I think that's unfortunately been one of the biggest victims of the digital era. When you think back to, when I think back to when I was a kid, like, MTV had just popped, and you think of some of the iconic music videos of, even going from the 80s, you talk about some of the Michael Jackson videos.
Yeah.
All the way
I
up
still
to
think back to Money for Nothing by Dire
my
Straits.
God, yeah, like that first use of like really blocky computer graphics and stuff, yeah. But then like, as electronic music kind of really blew up in the UK in the early 90s, then you had all these iconic music videos, like, and the controversy behind them. One of my favorite music videos, if you haven't seen it, is The Prodigy, Smack My Bitch Up. It is one of the best. And I won't ruin it because it's got one of the best twists at the end of a music video that you've ever seen. And it really sticks two fingers up because it was quite a controversial video because of what it actually depicted and what was going on. But it was almost like it was from a first person perspective. It was like really, really clever. So there's a lot of those iconic kind of Prodigy videos. And then I think to some of the Chemical Brothers videos, specifically the Star Guitar video, and just real artists in the music video space, like Michel Gondry is insane. Like he's the guy who did all the iconic Daft Punk videos, like Around the World, and all of those insane videos, those high concept videos. I was such a fan of his stuff. And again, it's like, you think about it, some of the biggest filmmakers in Hollywood today cut their teeth doing music videos, like David Fincher and Guy Ritchie, for example. Like they started off doing music videos. And, I do think in the modern era, in this kind of like spin up of how quick the content runs now, There is a space, and occasionally good videos do pop through. Like two, for example. I mean, I loved Childish Gambino. This is America. That video is amazing,
phenomenal.
Again, you can instantly recall it, which tells you it's a great piece of art. And actually, like I've been waxing lyrical recently about Dua Lipa's new single.
Yeah,
Houdini, like banger, absolute banger, produced by Tame Impala. Italo disco up the wazoo, and the video's sensational as well because it's super simple. It's just her and a crew just dancing and just expressing the content of the song. Basically,
I think I like every single thing that Kevin Parker of Tame Impala touches.
Yeah,
like,
he's a savant.
He's fucking brilliant.
He's a savant and just has turned himself towards so many different genres as well. But you can still hear that it's got his touch, which tells you that you're dealing with an iconic producer from a hands-on perspective, which is interesting because I've been spending a lot of time recently delving very deeply into Rick Rubin's book.
Oh, dude, Rick Rubin is absolutely, he's a fucking stud.
The audio book of that book is like a download straight from God. It's insane. I mean, I had a wild experience with it the other week. I had a sinus infection after the Amsterdam dance event. So I'm in a sauna, like cooking myself, trying to get rid of this thing before my extra long trip to Miami and everywhere else I've been around the world in the last few weeks. And I'm on a microdose of LSD in a sauna with a sinus infection, listening to the creative act. And I'm just like, the heavens are opening. Like, it's absolutely wild. I mean, it's not often because I don't really get on that well with audiobooks. I do prefer like having the paper version. This is one of those situations where I would recommend to everyone listen to the audiobook because the space Rick is in when he's narrating the audiobook is like, it's absolutely sensational. It's like listening to a guru sort of wax lyrical for a number of hours. Yeah, and it's sensational. But again, if you think about everybody that Rick's worked with, that it's them sounding more like themselves than they ever have done. Which is that's the scope of the hands-off producer, right? Rather than Kevin being very hands-on in the studio, Rick's the opposite, right?
He doesn't try to make them sound a certain way that he curates them. He helps them sound more like themselves than they ever have.
Yeah.
Which is why I think he can produce such a wide variety of music across so many different genres, is because he doesn't have a genre that he necessarily prefers, because it's like, I don't really care what it is. It's whatever they are. I want them to be more that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting having delved into a lot of this stuff with Rick and listening to a lot of the podcasts that he's done that have been great additions and great augmentations to the book. So my favorite podcasts of his that he's done in the last year and a half, the Lex Friedman podcast is sensational. The Joe Rogan one's okay, but I don't think they really went there. The other one that I love, actually, there's a British guy called Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and he's normally known for doing like health stuff because he was a former like health service doctor here in the UK. He's still practicing like medical professional, and he got Rick for a podcast. And I think the depth and the tone of the conversation even surprised Rick, because they really like got into it like in a very, very deep, very profound, very fundamental level. So actually, absorbing all of that has been very interesting, because what I've found is that there's been a lot of common ground in my approach to coaching and developing artists, which is something that I've been doing now since 2008. I've had a really deep passion for sharing my knowledge about music technology, audio engineering, but from a perspective of like helping people to sound more like themselves.
Yeah.
Because again, the other epidemic that we've got, apart from insanely quick release cycles in electronic music, is that we deal with a hell of a lot of people who feel like they should all sound like deadmau5 in order to succeed.
Yep. Yeah. People see whatever's the latest thing. Like, people see Fred again popping off, and they're like, all right, let me do everything that Fred again is doing right now.
Yeah. And ironically, like, what are you going to call yourself? Like Dave repeatedly or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Which then is like, as a great friend of mine and insane DJ, a guy called Patrice Baumel. He's a very, very close friend of mine. And he said this in a very, very cool Instagram post he did a while ago. He said, nobody wants a Me Too artist. We're not talking hashtag me too. We're talking like the tribute act. Like I always say,
Yeah.
you never want to become a tribute act to your favorite DJ, you know, and you have to watch that because it's a very easy trap to fall into. And one of the things that I've really doubled down on in recent years is saying to people, like, you've got to find your own way to this stuff. Like, I can show you the way, I can open the doors, but only you will figure out what the most you version of you is. And all I can do is give you feedback and give you hints and give you signposts for you to get there. But you've got to do the work and you've got to get there on your own.
So that's a really good transition into my next question that I have for you, which is how did you find your way to where you are right now? How many different iterations of Paul Nolan did you have to go through? And are you still going through right now?
Oh, I think you always go through it.
Yeah.
I think we'll be iterating until we iterate ourselves off this mortal coil, quite frankly, into whatever next form we take once we decide to take our leave of this rather dense version of reality that we're all involved in.
I think it's so like I'm curious what your take on this, but like, you know, change is obviously constant. Like the only constant in the universe is change, but yet I think there's still always a little bit of subconscious pushback from sort of evolving into that next version and knowing like, okay, like I'm done with this. Now it's time to change again. Like it's still like that shedding cycle doesn't necessarily always get easier for me, at least.
No.
Like between when I'm, you know, from when I started this podcast, for example, like this is my artistic expression right now to you know, whatever it turns into. But like the way that I talk to guests, the way that I interview people, the guests that I have on, like it's always changing. But I can notice that there are certain times where I'll notice like I've been doing the same shit for way too long. Like I've been asking the same questions, doing the same thing, and like it's no longer fun. Then that's when it's sort of time for that change. So like, how do you know when it's time?
It's a good question. I don't think you know.
Yeah.
I think you actually, I think you only realize that it's time after the time.
For sure.
You know, and sometimes you don't realize you've even shed that skin or iterated until you're already in that next iteration of yourself. That's a really interesting question on a number of levels, because I feel like I've shed more layers of myself in the last 7 years through, you know, the various sort of psychedelic experiences that I've had. And it's interesting, like the parallel here is that as I'm encouraging artists to become more themselves, I'm in a process of becoming the most me that I've ever been by shedding whatever it is that isn't serving me. And that's really interesting. Like one of the ways, in fact, iterating on that question, I think you understand that it's time to shift and it's time to iterate when things that worked for you in the past all of a sudden don't work. And all of a sudden there's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And I've even had this in psychedelics, right? And I got a very clear message around a year ago that the big part of my healing journey was done. And actually the exact words that were used in the 5-MeO DMT ceremony I did was, stop, you've dug past your own treasure. And it's so fucking true, man. It's like, you know, you're so determined to kind of like make the breakthrough, is that like you've literally dug underneath and past the breakthrough, and now you're on the other side of it wondering where the fuck you are. You know, so, you know, often, again, that's a great example of like, it's often not obvious until like, you know, there's a big flashing neon sign like that you're seeing in a ceremony. It's like, stop
doing this. Like,
stop smashing yourself into the next dimension. It's not necessary. And a lot of the time it's, and that's when like being proactive about it kind of, again, brings those diminishing returns. And actually you end up getting in your own way. Ironically, through the determination of wanting to get out of your own way, you actually get even more in your own way. You know,
it's trying to think your way out of a situation that you got yourself into by too much thinking.
Exactly, right. It's the Chinese finger puzzle, as I like to call it, or as Einstein put it, or I believe it was Einstein, like the same level of thinking that got you into the problem is not going to get you out of it.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know, and I think that that's a very nice way of putting it. But again, it's situations, it's people. You know, I've had a process even within the last year of like certain people who have been in my life for a very long time, and I'm talking decades.
Hmm.
It just became very clear that, you know, these friendships had kind of run their course.
Hmm.
And, you know, even in a professional context, there's been one or two situations which is like, okay, we've been walking side by side together for a long time, but this is where the paths deviate, you
Yeah.
know, and it's time for
And that's a
me
beautiful thing too. I think it's not celebrated enough when that happens. I
yeah.
think a lot of people look at those situations always as like a sad, almost bitter ending, but like like change is a beautiful thing.
Mm.
Like it should be celebrated. Like look at all this shit we did together. Now it's time to go out
Oh,
and
yeah.
do some more stuff in a different
Oh,
context.
100%. And, you know, I would extend that into my personal life as well.
Hmm.
So, one of the things is that actually it's about a decade now since my marriage came to an end.
Wow.
It's super interesting because, like, even though it was a wild time and, you know, it has its ups and downs, right? And obviously there was more downs than ups because otherwise, you know, we wouldn't have split up, right? But one of the ways in which I've chosen to look at it over the years is that just because we didn't stay together forever doesn't mean it's a failure. And
Yeah.
in fact, when you look at the people that we were when we first met compared to when we decided to go our separate ways, you could define that relationship as a resounding success because we were both much, much better people
Hmm.
than when we first met.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that, again, like you say, like, you know, that can be celebrated. It really, really can. And, you know, I think there's a practicality to it as well, especially when you go through something like a divorce, because obviously, you know, the government's involved, shall
You
we
got to sign
say.
some papers.
Yeah, you got to sign some papers, and then you've kind of got to put off your grieving process until that piece of paper arrives. Like in the case of the UK, it's 2 years later.
Damn.
If you don't want to go down the expensive route. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think, you know, any form of transition, and the irony is that the artist development company that I have is literally called Make Your Transition.
Hmm.
You know, and I get this a lot where it's like, oh, through the things like I name and the projects that I make and whatever, oh, I'm actually kind of teaching myself.
Hmm.
You know, rather as well as teaching other people. So I often get a lot more out of it, or as much out of it as the artists that participate in that community.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, that context, like make your transition, is an expression of the only constant being change.
Hmm. Always. So you've talked a couple times now. You said 7 years ago is really when your healing journey with psychedelics began. What
Mhm.
what started that, and why did you start that? Was it on purpose? Was it on accident? How has that changed you as a
Oh
person?
my
Let's
god,
let's let's dive into it.
Jesus, how long have you got? Um, but yeah, so for me, it was a pretty rough breakup that I went
Hmm.
through. And actually, it's interesting because part of it is to do with some of the stuff that I hadn't handled off the back of my marriage
From the
ended a few
divorce.
years previously.
Yeah.
So, again, when you trace it back 7 years, you're talking 2016. So, I was living in LA at the time. I'd moved to LA. I'd been producing with the legendary DJ Sasha. We did an
Nice.
album together, incredible album.
I'm about to go see him B2B Hernan for the first time
Oh, yes.
on Saturday.
Oh, yes. Excellent, man. Excellent. And Hanan just went back to back with Patrice, who I just mentioned at Stereo in Montreal last Saturday. And
Hmm.
apparently they were still going at noon. So, give you an idea about what Hanan can bring out of someone. But so yeah, I was working with Sasha on this amazing album called Scene Delete. And again, going back to what you were saying before, like working on that album and then listening to that album takes me instantly back to that part of my life. And it was a
Hmm.
very happy time in my life because I was working in this legendary studio in LA. I'd met this amazing person. We were very sort of deeply and intensely like into each other, and then it all went down in flames.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what went on in that situation was that I had a lot of issues around like receiving. So the irony was like the more that this person tried to love me, the worse I got.
Yeah. Oh no,
So
that's. I mean,
yeah,
these are deeply held wounds.
oh
Like
yeah,
I definitely can resonate with that one a lot. Like
yeah,
receiving love has always been really difficult. Receiving compliments, even.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I was always the giver.
Yeah, right. And same here. And that wasn't just to do with my sort of previous, relationship with my ex-wife. It was to do with something that went all the way back to the very beginnings of my life, like very early in childhood. But what I would normally do in this situation is I've been great at like rebounding, getting back to it, that kind of thing. And then in 2016, once this like relationship came to an end, like I just hit the wall, and rather than bouncing, I hit the wall and then just slid down it and then stayed in the corner.
Yeah.
So it was rough, and I just wasn't getting better, and I was feeling the weight of all of this unhealed trauma that I'd been carrying around for the vast majority of my adult life. I was 36 years of age when this
Mm-hmm.
was all happening, and then almost like the week after my marriage came to an end, it was all these signs started popping up, and it was like Graham Hancock goes on Joe Rogan, and I just started listening to Rogan, and he's talking about ayahuasca and
Mm-hmm.
and this would come up all the time, and it became something of a fascination, and it was like, well, one day,
Real like question real quick though, given the fact that you are a, club DJ, like had you done like MDMA or like 2CB or like any of those drugs like at any point?
nothing, and to this day, still no,
Still no?
never taken
Wow.
MDMA in my life or any form
Wow.
of recreational drug. I haven't even so much as smoked a spliff.
Wow.
Yeah, never smoked a cigarette. Yeah.
I think that's a very common misconception with DJs is that
Oh
we
yeah.
assume that you guys are just as fucked up as
Yeah.
us.
Well, exactly. So the funny thing is that I do a lot of work in immersive audio, and I remember talking to this guy, and he was like very, very high up technical guy, and he hadn't had a lot of experiences with DJs. And we were having a very deep technical discussion about audio engineering and surround sound because that's a real area of interest. And he just sort of takes a step back from me, and he just goes, "Paul, I just thought DJs pushed buttons and took drugs." And it's like, well, you're only half right in this
Yeah.
case, you know. But yeah, it is a very common misconception, and we are out there. There are there are DJs out there. I mean, there's not many of them, frankly, and
Mhm.
that's all good because I have decided to spend the vast majority of my adult life around people on MDMA, and it's been one of the best decisions of my entire life, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And we can get into the reasons why. But yeah, so at that point, I had never taken anything that had shifted my perception.
Yeah.
And the first thing that I had ever taken that you could consider to be psychoactive was ayahuasca.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was at the end of 2016. So
Mhm.
again, no, almost up on my 7th anniversary.
Did you go to Peru or did you find somebody in the UK or
Nope.
in LA at this point?
No, I found somebody in the UK.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. So I've actually done the vast majority of my psychedelic experiences in the UK.
Okay.
I will not go any further due to
Mhm.
the current
Two
legal
legal
framework.
reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Can neither confirm nor deny. So yeah, end of 16, I bump into a friend of mine who used to buy records from me back in the day
Mhm.
in my record shop. It turns out he's gone from like full-time DJ into like full-on like shaman.
Yeah.
And this was the tap on the shoulder that I needed. So I fly home from LA. 3 days later, I'm in a car going to an undisclosed location to go and drink ayahuasca for the first time. And that drinking of that first cup is like one of the most difficult moments of my life. And I just remember thinking to myself, I just need to know who I am on the other side of all of this fear.
Yeah.
And that's what pushed me over the line to drink that first cup. But, resistance is a very real thing. And yeah,
Was that first ceremony difficult for you?
yeah, because I'd never let go on that level.
Yeah.
You know, you hear this a lot, right? Especially with people who haven't interacted with it before. And
Yeah.
it's difficult because like us sort of like now, as you could call us, like frequent flyers,
Mm-hmm.
we kind of like forget what it was like to let go for the first time.
That
And
was
there's like, oh, it's
terrifying.
terrifying. And there's
God.
also no manual, right? And I mean, that's one of the things that used to annoy me the most. It's like, oh, you should let go. And it's like, well, how?
How the fuck do I do that?
How? You know, what? What do you mean? You know?
My facilitators, like during it was my second ceremony that really did it. My first ceremony was just kind of like a primer. It was pretty easy, but the second ceremony was where it really got deep and tough. And the facilitators, like, they had to just keep dropping me hints through the night. Like, I wasn't going to get this on my own.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
I was like, what the fuck I was just in pain and
Yeah.
suffering for like 4 hours.
Yeah.
They just kept on giving me tiny little nudges, like, maybe just sit with it. Maybe just be okay with that.
Yeah, well, for me, what happened was I did like the biggest schoolboy 101. Like, I love talking about this because it's the moment it all changed for me.
Yeah.
I drank the first cup, sat there. There's only like 6 other people in the ceremony. And then within 45, I'm the only first timer there, by the way.
Yeah.
Within 45 minutes, they're gone, right? And I'm sat there going, party time soon. And like 2 hours go by, nothing, not a thing,
Yeah.
maybe a little tingle, that kind of thing. So facilitator says, bar's open if you want more. Come up if you want. So I come up and I say to the facilitator, like, I'm not really feeling anything. Like, what do I do? And she says to me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I feel like I really need this, so give me another cup. So I drink the second cup. I sit down, and within 5 minutes, the second one smashes into the first one.
Yep.
And then I'm into a whole realm of stuff, you know. So it starts off with like panoramic fisheye vision, where I can almost like look behind myself.
Yeah.
And the moment it all changed, it was hysterical. I got the giggles for about half an hour, and I said to the medicine, I said to her, "Is that all you got?" Bad move.
Oh man,
bad
famous
move.
Famous last words.
And the only way I can describe it for the 6 hours after that was if you can imagine our former Prime Minister Boris Johnson trying to fly an F-16 fighter jet.
Got it.
Just no chance.
No.
Just absolutely got. Because I think the first time she likes to show off a little bit and go, "This is what I can do," and I definitely got that, and I got absolutely flat blasted through every single dimension you can think of. And I came round after that first night going, what the fuck? Like, everything I assumed about life up to that point was proven to be absolutely either flat wrong or at least up for debate.
Yep, exactly. It opens your perception to, like, it's that noticeable thought that everything I thought up until this point might not be correct. And I just have to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the nature of the mind itself. You know, I like to talk about this a lot with my artists because I think one of the major things that we do is that we live through a very limited lens. And it's the lens that's created for us by the combination of the mind and the ego.
Yeah.
And I heard something recently which is amazing, like a great quote. Can't remember who said it, but it goes something like, the longest journey you will ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart.
Wow.
You know, and it's totally true. It's totally true. And that was the beginning of that journey, really, because I was so mind-led by that point. And that's one of the greatest gifts of all of my psychedelic experiences, because I've done 30 plus ayahuasca ceremonies now. And, you know, as I said, I've also done Bufo, 5-MeO DMT, amongst others. And it's been a really strong journey, really strong. And one of the biggest gifts it's given me is the ability to give up thinking as a bad habit.
Yeah.
I was addicted to thinking like somebody was addicted to smoking.
Same.
You
I
know,
mean, it was the same thing. I mean, it was a very clear like download that first ceremony, just telling me that every single decision I had made up until that point in my life had been based on fear of some sort of trauma that happened to me in childhood, and that was guiding every single tiny little
mm,
decision process
mm.
right up until that point. And that I had the choice to either continue to let it do that, or I could continue to go deeper and start just unpacking it and simply understanding. Like, it's not about getting rid of the traumas right away. It's just an understanding.
Yeah, it's understanding and getting the map of where you are.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is the big thing, and that's what I got the second night. So the first one was incredibly strong. The second one was less so, but it was more very much healing. And I just remember this lifetime of shit that I've been carrying around. And it actually manifested physically as like a really heavy weighted vest that I felt like I
Hmm.
was wearing. Like I was walking around with this like 100 kilo weighted vest. Like someone would go for like a trail running or something to make it harder.
Hmm.
And that was like the weight of all of my trauma, and
Yeah.
really interesting to kind of get insights into like what your body does with all of this
Yeah.
stuff. Very
How the body
much
keeps the score.
exactly. That's exactly where I was going. Right, good old Bessel van der Kolk himself, and I got a real understanding of that.
Hmm.
And actually, like rewinding a little bit, the very beginning of my journey with this, actually, I go back to even before I'd taken psychedelics, was actually the beginning of me doing yoga around
Mm.
2012. And that was a real journey into my own body. It really was. And actually, what happened in this second ceremony was really interesting. So, apart from that sort of weight on my chest and on my back, I felt there was a tremendous amount of repressed anger that was actually stored in my right knee.
Mm.
So I actually was having like knee problems at the time and stuff like that. And actually, I've never had a problem with that knee ever since this
Wow.
ceremony, because what happened was like I resisted it so much. I very nearly didn't do the second ceremony because the first one was so hard. And I remember like I took a very, very small amount the second night,
Was it back to back nights, or do
back
you
to
have like a
back.
day in between? Okay.
Yeah, back to back. And I needed it, to be honest with you,
Hmm.
because the facilitator was very old school. Like it wasn't any of this love and light stuff. It was no, babe. You're gonna sit here and I'm gonna rattle this shikapa for 8 hours solid, and you're gonna fucking do the work.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And that's my style. It's like give me the tough love,
Tough.
because
That's what grandmother ayahuasca is. Grandmother is tough love.
oh, absolutely. I mean, I believe like all of these psychedelics are a form of tough love.
Yeah.
Like the experience I had with the Boga was very much the stern voice of like father to me.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't have like a full ceremonial experience with the Boga, it was still super strong for me. And it was
Yeah.
very much that confrontation of the masculine, which is very much what I needed at that point as well.
I
But
don't know if I'd ever consider LSD tough love. LSD's been pretty silly.
yeah, I mean, LSD is just like, yeah, fuck it, dude. I mean, I'm funny enough. I mean, I say this as somebody who's only ever microdosed with LSD,
Yeah.
and someone that has not done a full journey with LSD yet. Because basically, like I say, I got the big message a year ago, like, okay, that's enough for now, and I've
Yeah.
never really like been called to since. So like,
To fully do it.
yeah, and for me, it's like through all of those experiences, like I've gotten to a point where I'm in a very good place within myself. And
Yeah.
what I'm microdosing for is
Mhm.
to just maintain an optimum state,
Yeah.
essentially. So if
And tap
anything,
into that creative, and I think LSD is a very external creative energy.
mm,
Um, I've honestly never really truly microdosed with it,
mm,
but it's funny too. My last like full LSD experience, which was on my birthday earlier this in back in January, and like it was a lot of fun, but like a very clear download from LSD telling me that there's nothing more you're going to learn from this. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, I've taught you everything that you can possibly go from this
Oh
one. Like,
yeah.
if you're going to want to go deeper,
Yeah.
like, you're going to have to look into some other medicines at
Yeah,
this
of course.
point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I love LSD and I love mushrooms for that because it's just like here's the raw data, do whatever you want with that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
actually like the experiences I've had with ayahuasca and the 5-MeO as like and iboga to an extent with the more sort of you would call them the teacher plants, the teacher
Yeah.
compounds, have really stood me in good stead. That when I get that packet of like raw metadata from the likes of LSD and psilocybin, it allows me to be able to parse and understand the data a lot better so I
Hmm.
can actually still do work.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really happened a few months ago for me when I was microdosing with LSD was I had like a full-on shadow integration.
Mm.
Like I hadn't fully integrated my shadow or
Hmm.
even begun that process. And LSD really helped me to do that and really
Yeah.
do that incredibly quickly in a way that the ramifications I'm still feeling from that several months later.
Yeah. I've I came out of my ayahuasca experience last year pretty much just like fully understanding internal family systems therapy.
Wow.
Like, I had never heard of it before, and then I was just like literally like was trying to explain to my therapist at the time. It was not like an integration therapist or anything, but I was like, it brought out all these different parts in me, and like there are these parts that are like protecting these other parts, and it's like you're just explaining internal family systems. Like, this is a full framework. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, no shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've benefited greatly from IFS and
Yeah.
its approaches. And once you get enough experience with it, it's really interesting because you actually get to a point where you can actually do it on yourself.
Hmm.
If you become kind of integrated enough in your system,
Yeah.
you can understand even in the moment. Like I had a thing today, I had like a small argument with someone I love very much. And immediately after the argument, I walked out the door and I was like, so that's that part.
Hmm.
Let's have a little chat to that part and see what's going on
Hmm.
there. And it's really interesting to kind of witness that and understand that we're not just one thing. We
Yeah.
are a system of competing parts. And sometimes, like you mentioned before, the classic thing is the parts and the managers of those parts, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes the managers are not working together. Sometimes the
Nope.
managers are competitive, and the way that they see themselves protecting one part is actually a way to attack another part. And that's where
Yep.
you get stuck. That's where you get internal conflict. And it's
Hmm.
just a beautiful, beautiful metaphor for understanding it. And it complements psychedelics so well. It even complements things like basic stuff, like I say, basic, but more mainstream stuff like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
It really, really does. And that's been one of the beautiful, and I'm really glad you brought this up actually. It wasn't just 7 years of me just absolutely sending myself in a rocket
just
ship.
just doing psychedelics all the
Just
fucking time and not
yeah,
integrating
exactly.
and just living in the fifth dimension.
Exactly, just like shitting all over myself for 7 years. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's been like, well, what are the ramifications? What are the consequences? And one of the things I've been really blessed with is that all the facilitators that I've worked with have been incredibly on point, and a really, a person who's come to mean a lot to me is one of my facilitators, and she's always said, the the sharing after the ceremony and the integration afterwards are more important than the ceremonies themselves. And I got that message from minute one. Like from the very
Yeah.
first ceremony was like the integration afterwards, like the 4 to 6 weeks afterwards,
Hmm.
are equally, if not more important than the experience
I
itself.
think that's 90%. Like, 10% is in ceremony, 90% is
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah. And I hate to say it, considering, I've just said like drinking that first cup of medicine was the hardest thing I ever did.
Well, see,
Actually,
that's what opened it up.
yeah.
Like, people can open it up, and like, I think what people don't understand about psychedelics is like, you can have these experiences, but like, if you don't make the conscious choice to do the work afterwards, like, that experience isn't, it's just not going to mean anything
No,
at the end of the
no,
day.
if you don't
Like, we get
integrate
to
it.
choose how much meaning it has. Like, you made the conscious choice once you drank that first cup that this is going to change
Mm.
Paul Nolan. I am going to be a different person after this.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And it's the fact of like, well, why bother doing it if you're not going to do that? Quite honestly,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
And I made a very conscious decision. Like after those first two ceremonies, I'd like shifted so much, and I'd just dropped and let go of so much that I was never going back. And
Hmm.
the honest truth of it was that I wasn't able to go back. Very
Yeah, you
quickly,
can't.
it got into the thing of, well, who am I now? And then that whole other process. Now, all of that is out the way. Now, all the childhood stuff is kind of like starting to shift. And,
Hmm.
you've kind of resolved a lot, what happened in your relationship history and everything else.
Well, it's the question of who am I now, but also still looking at it through like the lens of the past tense, is like, who was I
Yeah.
always during these things,
Yeah.
but had all of this trauma on top of it that was preventing me from being that
Oh, yeah.
person.
Yeah. And as an artist, you realize that you're creating from that space of fear, which means
Hmm.
that, and you realize actually a lot of artists are creating from that space.
Oh, for
And
sure.
I kind of started looking at it from the perspective of like, well, Kurt Cobain was probably creating from that space. Amy
Hmm.
Winehouse was probably creating from that space. Jeff Buckley was probably creating from that space. Avicii might have been,
Yeah.
and these all have one thing in common: they're all in a 27 club.
Yeah.
So you look at it from that perspective, and it's like artists deserve to not create from that space. They
Hmm.
deserve to create from the most authentic space that they can, where actually it's effortless. And going back to the example I can only give, which is of my own creative process, that is why the album, which is called Dissolve, that we released on Microdose, that's why it happened in 2 weeks, because I was able to, after all of that experience, to just get the fuck out my own way.
Hmm.
I didn't have the luxury of time to pick it
Yep.
apart. So I said, on day one, whatever comes out, comes out.
That's it. This is going in the album.
This is it, because it has to, because I don't have the time to do anything else. So ultimately, that was an amazing experience of like, if you set the conditions correctly and
Hmm.
you set the intention correctly, like it can be effortless. Like there's this thing of like, oh yeah, I pulled my backside out for like a year making this album and stuff. And I almost had like the opposite kind of like stress about it, because I actually didn't want to go into interviews and press going, yeah, it kind of fell out of me in 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Because you almost feel a bit of like kind of vicarious guilt for everyone, where it was like, they really
That
like had
that
to
that
work
works so
hard,
hard.
you know?
Well, like something that when we were just talking before about how like a lot of these artists are creating from that space of fear, I think that a lot of artists also fall into the trap of thinking that that space of fear is what gives them that creative expression, that like they don't know how to create without that fear.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that thing of like, well, I'd best do this by any means necessary, because it's not going
Yeah.
to happen any other way, and it's
Like, my
bullshit.
suffering is my source of inspiration. So without, if I let go of the suffering, how am I going to get inspired
Yeah,
anymore?
and that creates a deeper point, which is what has happened is you've actually built an identity around your suffering
Hmm.
and around that trauma. So you've actually allowed yourself, both artistically and as a human, to be
Yeah.
defined by that trauma.
And now you're defending everybody that comes at you saying that maybe you haven't suffered,
Yeah.
that you can let it go. You're now spending
Mm.
your time not only upholding it but defending
You've
it.
got internal Stockholm syndrome,
Yeah.
basically. And it's that scene in The Matrix, isn't it? Where the woman in
Hmm.
the red dress walks past and Morpheus says to Neo, like, these people will defend their slavers until the end. And
Yep.
your own trauma will defend itself as you let it go. And
Hmm.
that's tough because, again, a lot of artists, like, really understandably, like, thoroughly shit themselves when you confront them with the possibility of letting go of that trauma, because it is the
Hmm.
primary fuel source. And again, like I said before, it's when you pull the pin out and the whole house of cards comes falling down. And then you've got to figure out, well, who am I without this? That's a
Yeah.
scary process. And it's
Oh, it's
something that I
terrifying.
went through actually, because I even realized recently And I wouldn't include the album in this. The album was very much like the first expression of something else.
Mm-hmm.
What I realized is because the electronic music industry is a very competitive industry, and it's weird to put the words music and art and competition into
Yeah.
the same. Like, I mean, again, I actually think the words music and industry should never go together, but
Mm-hmm.
they kind of.
I don't think I think psychedelic and industry should also never go
Well,
together.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a whole other context. That's a whole other conversation for another time. But the interesting thing is the fact of it's a very competitive industry, and what I realized was that I was creating from a space of feeling like I had to prove something to someone, to
Mm-hmm.
like prove that I was talented, to prove that I was special. And also as well, it made me reflect on like why I got into it in the first place. And I got into it for a lot of the right reasons and maybe one or two of the wrong ones. And one of the ones I
Mm-hmm.
had to really, really sit with was that I got into dance music and DJing in order to fill a void where my self acceptance should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite interesting because I went through a time prior to and even through the creation of the album, where I was feeling creatively actually very void and very numb because
Mm-hmm.
my fuel source was changing.
Yeah.
So my fuel source was being converted from running on fear, running on validation, running on trying to prove something to someone and trying to quote unquote make it, whatever the fuck
Mm-hmm.
that means. And primarily moving it towards love of process, love of the creative aspect, and just
Understanding that you've already made it.
exactly right. And then just realizing that all you have to do is authentically express yourself the best way
Mm-hmm.
possible, and everything else is irrelevant.
Yeah,
So that's a
everything else
yeah,
will fall into place if you come at it from that place. Again, like it's coming out from the sense of I've already done the thing. Like I'm not doing it right now. I'm not trying to do it. I've already done it, and this is just the byproduct of that.
yeah, exactly. And it's the difference between trying, and it's why I've also got a huge issue with the word grind,
Mm-hmm.
because grind infers like pain. Like think
Yeah,
about it, like if your knees are grinding
and
or
also
your
and
teeth
just
are
like
grinding,
force.
yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
force. Whereas like as you said, like it was sort of effortless because you did it in two
yeah,
weeks because you just had to do it.
yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. David Hawkins?
No, I don't think so.
Wow. Okay. So this guy, wow, changed my life. As much as a dead person can change your life. So basically, he wrote one of, if not the most important spiritual books I've ever read. It's a book literally called Letting Go.
Okay.
And he wrote another book, which is really interesting, which is called Power versus Force. So you just said the word force. And that's interesting because power is the creative flow that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So that surrendered, let go of kind of state where you get
Mm-hmm.
out of your own way, and it's that very Rick Rubin, allow the ideas to come through and everything. That's true power.
Mm-hmm.
And anything else other than that is just a form of trying to force it, you know.
Yeah.
And Hawkins really, really nailed it because he actually created a map of human consciousness and actually scored all
That's
the
sick.
different states. So, like the closest state to death in his estimation was apathy,
Mm.
and then it goes something like apathy, fear, grief, courage, and then anger. And then
Mm-hmm.
anger is actually, and this really helped me actually, because I had a lot of anger come up in the last few years, like a lot of repressed anger about
Yeah.
what happened in the past, where I currently found myself, etc. I had a lot of repressed masculine energy actually up until the last few years. And, a number of things have helped me, including this book, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu has been a massive part of that as well. And he helped me to understand, David Hawkins, that anger was a good thing. And that anger leads to courage because once you channel that anger into courageous action, it means that you might be angry, but at least you're going to fucking do something about it. And then
Yeah.
all of the higher states like acceptance, love, creativity, all of this stuff, compassion, empathy, are all available to you once you break through anger
Mm-hmm.
to courage and everything else.
Yeah, I think it's like when we're holding in that anger, like that's when it really becomes the bad thing.
Yeah.
But like anger in itself is not the bad thing. It's understanding, okay, like I feel angry, I am angry. What do I do with the anger?
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of us have been taught that like we have to hold it
Yeah.
in. Like we can't let people see that angry side of
Yeah,
us.
actually, and that's a societal conditioning, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and we've been conditioned to interpret anger as a bad, scary thing. When you
Yeah.
actually think about what anger actually is, it's a reaction to a violated boundary.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is not the anger. The problem is that we either don't have any boundaries at all, or we're not
Mm-hmm.
aware of what boundaries are in place.
Yeah.
So we don't know how to react to them. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, we have as much of a screwed up attitude to anger as we do with death. So it becomes very difficult because people can't sit in that anger or other
No.
people's anger and be okay with that just being a state and being an
Yeah.
energy
With
in and
it's
of
just
itself.
it's just there. That doesn't mean I have to yell at you, but like I can just be like,
Yeah.
listen, I'm angry right now.
Well, yeah,
That's it.
that. And also, as
We don't
well,
and we don't and we don't and we don't have to change it. It's like it's not like, oh, I'm angry, like, oh well, what do I do to make you not angry? It's like, no, like I just am, like I need to sit with the anger.
yeah, exactly. And then that runs into things like, radical personal responsibility, which
Hmm.
is, we're responsible for our own state. Other people
Yeah.
might reflect different parts of you, but it's all on you. I love this. Like I'm in the process of like dating someone at the moment,
Hmm.
and it's been a really magical kind of situation. Like to meet someone who gets a lot of this stuff, and I
Yeah.
was sort of regaling to her like some of the more beautiful teachings I've had on retreats, and the classic one is like being able to break words down, and one of them is the meaning of the word intimacy actually means into me I see.
Hmm.
And actually, what it shows you is that all other people are doing are reflecting that which you already are.
Relationships are mirrors.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's taken me a long time to be sort of ready for like a deep connection again.
Hmm.
And they are the strongest medicine of all. Like, forget your 5-MeO DMT and your ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Like, being in a relationship with someone you care about deeply is the strongest shit you can drink.
Yeah. I'm in a relationship right now. This is my first relationship that I've ever been in. Like every other, I mean, growing up, I was just trying to hook up with people and like wasn't like I can look back now and be like subconsciously like I was just fucking terrified of having that mirror to really see who I
Yeah,
was. Like I wasn't ready.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. It gets
and
harder.
now that I'm in a relationship, I mean it's beautiful, but like it's not, it's not like it's all just love and fairies all the
No,
time. Like
God, no.
sometimes she does stuff and I get really fucking annoyed,
Mm.
and then I have to sit there and be like, why am I so annoyed right
Yeah,
now? Like it doesn't make
yeah.
sense, and it's all reflecting back at me.
Oh,
It's like,
yeah,
yeah, where's
exactly.
where's this really stemming
The
from?
best part of it is when you get called out on your own shit.
Hmm.
Like, and I haven't had that in a long time. And
Yeah.
it's vital. And it's vital to be able to be in a position where you're willing to have that done.
Hmm.
That's a really, really important part of it. And it's funny you're talking about like how difficult it is like at your sort of like younger state of life, shall we say.
Hmm.
As you get older, it gets harder.
Yeah.
Trust me, like I'm 43 years of age, and I'm like, oh shit. I'm like that Grand Theft Auto meme. You're, oh shit, here we go
Oh,
again.
here we go again.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's a tremendously funny thing, but it's an amazing blessing. It really, really is to you know to be able to be related to that way, and actually, like I actually put that on my list. Like it's funny because I put it up on a dating app and I was like, this is the laundry list. And one of the
Yeah.
things like was must be able to call me out on my own shit.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to keep yourself honest or be kept honest, even when you can't be honest with yourself, because
Yeah.
parts and managers are gonna do whatever they
my
need to do to
my
survive.
my my girlfriend loves playing devil's
Oh
advocate.
yeah,
Like
love it.
absolutely fucking loves it,
Mm-hmm.
and I hate it sometimes, but I respect it too, cuz like I see the need for me to like not be given all this like just positive confirmation of like everything I believe all the time.
Oh yeah.
Of needing to be sort of called out and be like, well, what if this isn't true? Like why, like, you know, like why would you just assume that?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. Like I've never been asked that question before. I haven't thought of it.
You're telling me it's not all unicorns, poop, and rainbows? Shit, man. Why not? Yeah, I mean, I had an amazing interview a long time ago with Moby about that. And he talked about, like, you know, being in conflict in relationships. And he said, like, the number one thing that his partner would always reflect back to him is just a question of, like, what's your role in this? Like, how are you creating this? Because, you know, one of the things that I really had to sit with, and one of the toughest lessons through my healing journey, if you want to call it that, was that I was the architect of all of it on some level. And don't get me wrong, awful things have happened in my life. You know, I was profoundly bullied as a child. You know, I had difficult relationships, let's just put it that way, which led to a lot of repression and a lot of emasculation. But the moment it started to change was the moment that I accepted that I was co-creating this. Yeah. And I was actually attracting that into my life based on
radical self-responsibility. Yeah, it's like, and also too, like I'm then like, as when you said attracting those things, it's like, it's so true, because you get into this space of like, well, this is what I'm used to, this is what happened, so you subconsciously attract the exact same terrible situations to keep happening to you, because you're used to it. Like it's still comfortable in a way because you know the outcome. And like with it, you know, we're most scared of the unknown. I think that's what our ego, at least, is most scared of, what it doesn't know. So if it can know what an outcome is going to be, even if the outcome is going to be incredibly shitty and terrible, it's still going to choose that incredibly shitty, terrible outcome over an unknown outcome.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the irony is that the ego's primary drive is to survive, right? But the irony is, I mean, I was shown just how deep the ego, what lengths the ego will go to, because I worked with an incredible psychotherapist called Charmaine Berry. Incredible woman. I'll shout her out right now. And she mixes a lot of the IFS stuff with like a lot of like real non-dualistic teachings. And she really showed me the lengths my ego will go to. And actually, the irony is that the ego's primary drive is to survive. So it goes into that predictability. But it will take that predictability to such an extent that it will kill you. Yeah. And that's the irony of the ego. It's like, well, at least if I'm going to kill you, at least I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I know how I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've got the certainty of how you're going to die, which actually helps me to oh, no, it doesn't. You know, and actually, you have to take it to that logical conclusion to go, my God, it's full of shit.
Yeah.
You know, you actually have to take it to that point. And that's the beautiful thing. Like, again, working with a lot of amazing coaches, like one of my best friends, guy called Sam Taylor. I used to run a record label with him called Chapter 24 Records, and he's an incredible coach now. And he's integrated a lot of this IFS and theta healing and a lot of other stuff into this an incredible modality. And what I've worked with him on is this incredible process of like, right, well, let's find a program that is driving a part in a manager type situation. And let's just bring it all the way down. It's a very David Hawkins situation, like thought process. So effectively, any drive of the ego, you can drill it down into the same thing. And the root of it is always a fear of death.
Yep.
You know, and and it's really interesting because you can either play like whack-a-mole with your parts in your system, or what you can do is decide, and I've done tremendous amounts of work with Sam over the last year and a half, where I've been able to, with his help, get to like absolute roots. And you express these like really core beliefs right down at the bottom that are related to death, and you can't even believe what's coming out of your mouth. Yeah. The absurdity of it, but it's being driven that way. And you get to pull these entire complex systems up where you'd be up here kind of, you know, playing duck hunt, like pinging them off like one at a time, like a sniper. or you can just go down to the root, pull the whole fucking thing out, and go,
Just pull,
see you
yeah,
later.
toss.
Bye. No longer of
Mhm.
use, no longer serves. Let go
Yeah.
of. Thank you. And it's a deeply, deeply powerful process. It really is.
When I first started doing like a lot of this like real healing work, I think me and a lot of people that I know, I think can have the tendency to immediately look at the ego and then be like, well, fuck you, ego. Like, I hate the ego. Like, what is the point of this
Oh
too?
yeah.
And then it's like, I've had to sort of then course correct, and as you said way earlier, but parts of your shadow that you hadn't integrated into you, integrating the ego back into you, and figure like
Oh yeah.
how do we coexist? Like the ego is not the enemy. Like the ego
Exactly.
is doing its core
Mm.
drive, which is to keep you from dying, which is to keep you
Oh
alive.
yeah.
It just doesn't always get it right
No.
sometimes. So like it's understanding how do you live in symbiosis with that.
Absolutely. And as much as I love Ryan Holiday and what he
Mhm.
does with like Daily Stoic, and a lot of his
Yep.
books are fantastic. Like that one book I've got a real problem with. Like
Yeah.
the ego it's not. Like you're
It's
just
not the enemy.
demonizing a part of yourself, and it's a part of
Yeah.
yourself. Like
Yeah, exactly. You're demonizing that part of
yeah,
yourself, and then you can never fully integrate. Like you are you're not your ego, and you are your ego at the same
yeah,
time. Like back
exactly.
to like
Yeah,
duality.
exactly. It's like try tying your shoelaces or wiping your ass every morning without the ego.
Hmm.
It's not going to happen. And it's less about ego size. It's more about ego placement. And
Hmm.
this is what like the work, like a lot of the sort of the seminal men's work books have really helped me with. Like especially Gillette and Moore, the amazing book that was a big shifter for me. The King Warrior Magician Lover book, which was insane. And what that talked about was your ego can be as big as the planet Mars, but as long as it understands that it's not the center of the universe, it's all good.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that really like, not that I've brought my ego to heel, as in like, I've kind of got it whipped and like next to me like
Hmm.
a compliant dog. It's not that. It's like I've made friends with it.
Yeah.
And I've
Exactly.
taught my ego the lessons it needs to understand that there are different ways to get. We all want the same thing. Like my
Yeah.
ego wants to not only survive, it wants to thrive, it wants to succeed, it wants the best for me. It
Yeah.
really
Have you
does.
read The Untethered Soul?
I haven't
Oh God. Okay, read that
mm,
book. That very much like talks about that concept of like what is the ego, like who are we as people, and talks about the ego in a way of like think of the ego as your best
mm,
friend. But like if your best friend is talking to you all the time and like won't shut the fuck up and like keeps making you like, do and say and think all these things, like you're just going to stop listening to them at a point. But yet there's a lot of people that don't understand, like we don't need to listen to everything that our ego is telling us to do. We can choose to just sort of detach from it when it's not serving us, and then we could go back to it when we want its advice, and then we could go back to not listening to it. It's this relationship that you have.
I've always said that the ego is like Alan from The Hangover. Like he's your best friend and you love him to bits.
Yeah.
He's kind of a dick. And every now and
Yeah.
then he just needs an arm around him and to be told that everything's going to be okay.
Yep.
And it is actually like, it's a funny thing to say, but it's also incredibly true. We've all
Hmm.
got that one friend that has the best of intentions, but
Yep.
just their application of what they think is in your best interest just doesn't
Could
help.
use work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, exactly. And ironically is that I think we are that friend to somebody else
Oh, for
as well.
sure.
Like, we're
100.
all Alan
I
to
know
someone,
I
right?
am. I know, so I know most of my friends like will listen to my advice. They'll be like, just shut the fuck up.
Oh yeah, totally. But it's true, man. Like and it's a funny process because when you think about it, like we create the whole thing, right? We
Mhm.
actually do, and this is where like a lot of Charmaine's Charmaine's teachings really came into it. Is that she really helped me with introducing me to a guy called Rupert Spira,
Mhm.
and he is really it's like the non-dualism and like amazing videos. Like he helped me to understand that the biggest irony of the ego is that it doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
It's a concept. and even the mind. Like the mind is a concept. It's a construct.
It's all fake, man.
It's all fake, and we all basically the whole thing's a cope.
We created the whole fucking thing.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing's a cope. When
Yeah.
you think about it, like we create an ego, which is our imagined, idealized version of ourselves, in order to simultaneously put that in front of the world to give us a barrier, a buffer between us and the real world. And also to compensate for any sort of perceived lack that we have in ourselves.
That we have.
And
Yep.
I said this before, like, and I did like a whole class on this in my artist development platform where I called the mind a calculator. And one of the big problems that we get into in life is that if the mind is a calculator, therefore the only thing it can do is crunch the numbers.
Yeah.
We keep asking it questions that it can't do the calculations for. It's like, and the stupid analogy.
And they're getting mad when it doesn't have the answers.
Right. Or, the only thing it can do, apart from express numbers, is for you to turn it upside down and get it to spell boobies. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's how ridiculous it is. And it's, the mind is, as a construct, a very, very useful servant and an extremely poor master. And to kind of bring that whole idea back to full circle, what I was saying before about people living through a very, very restricted lens. It's like we have to take up the entirety of our consciousness and kind of like, it's trying to suck a golf ball through a garden hose, basically. It kind of doesn't work. And I think that is one of the things that psychedelics are absolutely fantastic for, is to make things really malleable, really plastic, and also to get you to take a step back and actually appreciate just how much consciousness is actually flowing through you, and that you're not any of this stuff. And this is this beautiful video with Rupert Spira, where this woman was talking to him, and she's like, well, my mind this and my mind that, and da-da-da-da-da. And he just said, can I just stop you there? It's like this old English gentleman, like, and he just goes, can I just ask you to tell me where in your body your mind is? Like, where is the organ of the mind? Because you can point to your lungs, and you probably know where your stomach is, and you probably know where your heart is, or your eyes. Where is the mind? And she couldn't answer him. And he went, exactly. Like, the mind doesn't exist. The ego never lived. And as soon as you start seeing through this stuff, you just end up at thoughts being just that and energy. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that is absolutely beautiful and a great place to end it. I feel like I could keep talking to you for probably hours at this point.
Yeah, man.
But Paul, man, I appreciate you coming on. Before we leave, I guess, is there, anything that you want to shout out, anything that you're working on, where to find your album, where to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bandcamp is our preferred medium because it really does support artists. So you can look for us on Bandcamp. The label is called Microdose Music. My album is up there. There's also a free download of a re-edit of MAC3 Outro that we did, which has become kind of like the unofficial anthem of the Wonderland Conference, which has gone down really, really well. So that's a free download. The album is there as well to be purchased. We've got a lot of plans coming for Microdose Music. We've signed 5 albums, which are going to be coming out over the next year. We're also going to be getting a YouTube channel going with all sorts of stuff. And on top of that, there's going to be not only a special limited edition vinyl version of my album Dissolve coming soon, there's also going to be a remix album. So we're going to take that deep intention of me putting the 7 years of experience that we've just talked about into an album to help other people to go through those processes. We're going to fold that energy and intention and hold it back onto the dance floor. Because like you mentioned, electronic music is one of the most deeply shamanic things that we do when you look at it from that perspective. And I really want to lean into that intention now rather than, as a dear friend of mine, Craig Richards, said, rather than, play into the crowd with myself in mind, I'm trying to ironically dissolve, hence the title of the album, into an intention of playing and presenting music to people in a way that helps them feel better walking off a dance floor than when they walked on.
Hell yeah.
And, if we can take this music and be able to present it in different ways, and there's going to be some really big DJs that are aligned with this mission that are going to represent my work in beautiful ways, then, we're hopefully going to build something through that. So Microdose Music on Bandcamp. Obviously, everything's on all the streaming sites and stuff like that as well, if you prefer. But yeah, keep an eye on the Microdose platform, because there's going to be a lot more coming through their social media, through their channels. Obviously, they're a great media organization, so that'll be the main place to go, microdose.buzz.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much, brother.
You're welcome.
It's been absolutely amazing.
You're welcome, Cameron.
So much love to you, and we'll be in touch, brother.
Thank you very much, man. It's been a blast.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and thank you, Paul, for coming on the podcast and sharing your knowledge with the world. All of his info is going to be in the footnotes of this podcast if you want to get in contact with him. Again, make sure that you're following Trip Sitting, and if you do ever want to contact me, do any collaborations, want to sponsor, send me an email at tripsittingblog@gmail.com. And or if you just want to chat, I'm fine with that too. Shoot me a DM. But yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you for the next episode.